In a world where the climate crisis deepens, a staggering reality looms. By 2030, an additional 100 million people could be plunged into extreme poverty. But behind this statistic lies a more complex story of inequality and vulnerability. Climate change isn't just an environmental crisis, it's a social and economic upheaval with deep and far-reaching consequences. Around the globe, the effects of a warming planet are felt unequally, amplifying existing disparities between the rich and the poor. In this video, we will delve into the intricate web linking climate change with wealth inequality. We'll explore how the escalating climate crisis deepens economic divides, threatens livelihoods, and challenges our understanding of equity and justice in the face of global environmental change. Climate change refers to significant, long-term changes in the global climate, a pattern of weather over time. It's a phenomenon driven primarily by human activities, notably the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas, leading to an increase in greenhouse gases in the Earth's atmosphere. These gases trap heat, causing a rise in global temperatures, a process known as global warming. The consequences of this warming are profound and far-reaching. We're witnessing more frequent and severe weather events, from devastating hurricanes to prolonged droughts. The polar ice caps are melting at an alarming rate, leading to rising sea levels. These changes not only disrupt natural ecosystems but also threaten species with extinction. Our agricultural systems are strained, water sources are becoming less reliable, and entire landscapes are being transformed. As the planet warms, we're also seeing changes in precipitation patterns and the intensification of heat waves, making some regions more prone to wildfires and others to flooding. These environmental changes are more than just ecological issues, they have cascading effects on human societies and economies, laying the groundwork for a deeper examination of how these shifts exacerbate wealth inequalities. Simultaneously, the world is witnessing a staggering level of wealth concentration. As of now, the richest 1% of the global population controls more than twice the wealth of the bottom 6.9 billion people combined. But the impacts of climate change are not felt equally. The poor, often living in vulnerable areas, are disproportionately affected. For instance, low-income communities in coastal regions face the brunt of rising sea levels and intense storms, lacking the resources to relocate or rebuild. In arid regions, small-scale farmers, who depend on predictable weather patterns, struggle as droughts become more frequent and severe, pushing them further into poverty. Wealth inequality exacerbates these challenges. Those with fewer resources find it harder to adapt to climate change. For example, in developing countries, the lack of financial means often means there's no adequate safety net against crop failures due to changing weather patterns. In urban areas, poorer neighborhoods might lack the infrastructure to withstand extreme weather, making residents more vulnerable to events like floods and heat waves. In parts of Africa, smallholder farmers face increasing droughts, but with limited access to irrigation or drought-resistant crops, their livelihoods are under constant threat. In contrast, wealthier individuals and nations can invest in adaptive measures like advanced agricultural technology, stronger infrastructure, and even climate insurance, creating a resilience gap. Another poignant example is Hurricane Katrina in the United States. When it struck New Orleans in 2005, the wealthier residents often had the means to evacuate and recover, while poorer communities faced devastating losses. Lacking resources for evacuation and rebuilding, many low-income families couldn't return home for years, if at all. Similarly, during the Australian bushfires of 2019 to 2020, wealthier homeowners in affected areas had options to insure and protect their properties or relocate to safer places. In contrast, lower-income individuals and rural residents, especially indigenous communities, face disproportionate losses. They had fewer resources for fireproofing homes, limited access to private insurance, and lesser mobility to evacuate or rebuild afterward. These examples from different parts of the world illustrate a harsh reality. The impacts of climate change are not just physical but also deeply socioeconomic, widening the gap between the rich and the poor. This dynamic poses a significant challenge, as addressing climate change effectively also means tackling the underlying issues of wealth inequality. Under high-emission scenarios by 2050, the impacts of climate change will starkly differentiate the fates of nations and communities. Low-lying island nations face existential risks, with potential economic damages exceeding 10% of GDP due to rising sea levels and extreme weather events. In Africa, the situation is particularly dire. By the end of this decade, 118 million extremely poor people will face prolonged periods of drought, flooding, and extreme heat directly resulting from climate change. This scenario underscores a growing divide in wealth inequality, with the poorest populations bearing the brunt of environmental changes. Financially, the burden of climate-related disasters is set to increase dramatically. Estimates suggest that the global economic impact from climate change could reach $551 trillion by the end of the century. High-income countries might be able to absorb these costs more readily, but low-income countries will likely struggle, thereby widening the economic disparity. The cost of climate adaptation in developing countries, for example, is estimated to reach $340 billion per year by 2030, a sum far beyond their current financial capabilities. This financial strain will further exacerbate the gap between the rich and the poor, with climate change serving as a significant driver of global wealth inequality. As we navigate through the complexities of climate change, it's clear that its impact goes far beyond the environmental sphere. The intersection of climate change and wealth inequality presents a profound challenge to global equity and justice. The poor, already disadvantaged, are disproportionately affected by the adverse effects of a warming planet, while those with resources have the means to adapt and mitigate these changes. This growing divide calls for urgent, collective action. Addressing climate change effectively requires not only environmental solutions but also a commitment to reducing wealth inequality. It is a matter of moral imperative and practical necessity to ensure a sustainable and equitable future for all. Our choices today will shape the world for generations to come, and it's imperative that we choose a path that leads to resilience, justice, and inclusivity in the face of climate change.